Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us for this session on the future of financial crime investigations. This conference, as it was already said, at its 9th edition, has become one of the most important global platforms for law enforcement for advancing our collective response to financial crime in the crypto ecosystem. I see that year after year, it brings together law enforcement agencies, regulators, private sector, innovators, compliance professionals, and academics. And I think the reason is quite simple. We see it every year, year after year. No single actor can fight crypto-enabled crime alone. So criminals move fast. They exploit new technologies such as privacy coins, cross-chain breaches, every new techniques that is available. They take advantage of jurisdictional gaps and use professional enablers to hide the assets. I think it's a moving target, and it demands constant innovation from our side, training, and especially collaboration. At last year's conference, we saw recommendations that still resonate today. Let me name them for a second. The first one was accelerate innovation in investigative tools, including AI, boost enforcement capacity and hands-on training, reorganize to improve collaboration, engage proactively in multi-sector partnerships, and always consider the entire chain, from prevention to the facilitators. And this panel today is designed exactly in this way. Brings together voices from law enforcement, the private sector, regulatory, asset management, and education. Okay, so let me briefly introduce them. So I will start with Pamela Clegg. She's the Vice President for Latin America at IVIX. Do I pronounce it well? Pamela brings deep experience in global financial crime investigations and compliance, now heading up IVIX operation in Latin America. She represents the private sector's role in building innovative tools and transforming publicly available data into a powerful resource. Then we have Hugo Hoyland, Chief Strategy Officer at Asset Reality. He specializes in one of the most critical, yet often overlooked, parts of the puzzle, which is how to securely seize assets and then, once seized, how to manage them all the way through the confiscation and forfeitures cycle. His other big area of focus is operational finance, or deploying assets in support of covert operations. We will discuss more about that, not just as an intelligence gathering and disruption tool, but also as a way to generate future seizure opportunities. Daniel Leon, cryptocurrency specialist at Europol. Daniel is on the front line of international law enforcement, tackling cross-border cases involving privacy coins, DeFi protocols, we named them, organized crime. His perspective underscores the importance of rapid information exchange and global cooperation. Then sitting next to me, we have Marian Müller, Head of Education at Caudena. Marian is currently launching the Caudena Academy, which teaches advanced forensic techniques to law enforcement investigators and brings expertise on crypto investigations and public sector investigation training. And then we have Scott Johnston, formerly UK law enforcement for 18 years. Today is the Director of Global Public Sector at Chainalysis, bringing the expertise of one of the major blockchain analytics firms and insights on public-private partnerships. Did I pronounce something not correct?
No, it just has a fan culture.
Woo. Okay, I say together these voices reflect the conference core principle, which is innovation plus enforcement plus collaboration. Okay, enough presentations now. With that said, let's dive into our discussion. So I will start with Daniel. So Daniel, law enforcement agencies like Europol that you represent today are increasingly confronted with investigations that move faster than traditional investigative tools sometimes can handle, right? I face the same problem myself in, every day in the investigations I conduct, where I see privacy coins, decentralized finance used, instant cross-chain swaps. And I see them in each and every investigation. Would you agree with that? Or what do you see them as the hardest challenges today, and what about the future?
Thank you, Fede. Thank you for that question. And nice to be on a panel with you, because I was meeting you in 2018 during my first attendance at this conference when you were still working for the Basel Institute. Time flies. So it might be fun for the audience to get like a peek behind the curtain when we as a panel have a coordination call on discussing how we're going to do these things. And Federico introduced this question, and then he was expecting me to go into the direction of agreeing. Like, yes, you're right, Fede. Privacy coins, bridges, swaps, these are the most challenging things. And I said, well, you would be right to an extent for a lot of the cases. But actually, the thing that's worrying me the most is that I still see that there are a lot of law enforcement agencies, regulatory bodies that don't take crypto seriously in their investigations. Even though we are in 2025, we are a decade after the white paper of Satoshi Nakamoto. And for lack of a better term, I would call this institutional awareness. That is a big problem, which is actually why it's good that we're discussing that here during this conference. Because contrary to the conference that EC3 organizes on cryptocurrency, that is filled with a lot of people, on the front lines, the investigators themselves, we actually have a lot of policymakers in this room as well, and online, a lot of prosecutors, people with mandate. And I would really make a call to action to them to start looking at how have you organized cryptocurrency investigation in your respective law enforcement agency or in your regulatory body. Because hiring personnel, training personnel, and retaining personnel is one of the toughest challenges. I would say that's even a more pressing issue than the mixers, the bridges, and the swaps, which can be challenging. I would give you that one. But I would say that we have a lot of work to do collectively to make sure that we cover those first bases.
Thank you so much. I don't mind you disagreeing. That was a very interesting point, actually. Yes, and maybe now I can call Marian into this after what we heard from Daniel, because you focus very much on education and you're just launching the Caudena Academy. What's your point of view on that? And what is your feeling? Do you agree with what Daniel said, that it's the lack of knowledge by law enforcement is one of the main points that hampers investigation?
Yeah, I think it's fair to call out that there has been a big shift in law enforcement knowledge over the years. From my work at Kraken, a large centralized exchange, one of my biggest issues used to be educating agents that would just send pages and pages of Excel files saying, our tool has spit out all of these transaction IDs, give us all of the KYC data related to all of this. And we have to go, I don't think you quite get how this data has reached or understand why you want this information. And so one of the biggest challenges there was just getting to the basics of what information are you trying to find. And so I see less of that now, but interestingly, the same problem I feel still exists. So you have a lot more advanced knowledge. And I credit kind of the EC3 training program and the kind of work that Daniel does with all these advanced techniques and on all of this advanced tooling, lots more knowledge out there. But as you also alluded to, a lot of the fundamental knowledge still lacking. Have you actually used crypto? Do you know how a blockchain works? And so being able to, track bridge transactions or cross-chain swaps on a tool doesn't necessarily actually give you the knowledge of how the transaction is working. And to be able to bring that to court and defend it, that to me is something that the people that actually understand this on the law enforcement side are telling us as well. We need the verifiable, court admissible data that we can use. So something that I always reiterate is kind of going back to those fundamentals of, do you know how the transactions actually work? Do you know how the data that you're trying to get reached that point? And can you defend it in court? So in general, a huge expanse in knowledge over the years, but still kind of the same fundamental issues.
Sorry thank you, Marian. I think there's another element to this as well, that we're starting to see crypto appearing in policing where traditionally it hasn't really been there. So, for example, 10 years ago, you might have made the assumption that actually the only people who touch crypto in their day jobs would be the digital forensics people. That would be it. That would be their world. What we very quickly saw, actually, it was not the digital forensics people who were having the most crypto expertise. It was the financial investigators, because they were starting to see it as a way to follow the money. We're now seeing crypto come up in entirely different areas of policing. For example, kidnap, extortion, ransom payments, these traditional areas where kidnappers, extortion, ransomware, they're asking for the payment to be done in crypto, and maybe negotiators who are working at the table, working actively on these cases, don't have the fundamental knowledge to be able to understand how crypto can be used as a mechanism for them to maybe buy time or generate leads as part of a broader case. Another area might be covert operations, test purchases, interacting with buyers and sellers where the medium of exchange becomes crypto. So it's not just within, I think, effectively a lack of the I guess the depth and the breadth of knowledge just within the world of tracing and investigations into scams, thefts, and hacks. We're seeing it in all our other areas of policing, and it's quite a pressing issue.
Yep, good point.
Yeah, thanks a lot for your perspective. And I really agree with what you said, Marian. When I talk to investigators, I'm really shocked sometimes when I ask them, I mean, investigators who investigate crypto assets, and I ask them, have you ever done a transaction yourself? Have you ever installed a wallet? And they say no. How can you really investigate that if you never tried it? And Pamela, we worked a lot together also in the past on education. Maybe before another question that I want to ask you, what's your take on that?
No, I think it's a good point. In addition to what we see in policing and in the law enforcement space, we also see it coming up more and more in FIUs and within tax authorities. And there's even less of a knowledge base than what you would find within the law enforcement community. So, coming across some FIUs, very advanced, obviously they have a lot of experience. It's like there's this gap in between where either they know and have a very, built out knowledge base on crypto, or they have zero knowledge and zero tools to be able to tackle the issue. And that's, I would say, an even bigger gap within the tax authority space when you're looking at things like tax evasion. And as we well know, financial crimes generally have a linkage into the tax evasion space. Where there's smoke, there's fire. So that's one of the areas that we see as a challenge as well. But I mean, just recently in Latin America, I came across a public sector fusion center that has zero crypto knowledge, they have zero tools, and they have one analyst who really only knows anything about crypto because he, started doing crypto himself, and that's it. But I would also reiterate what Marian said about, popping into tools, using tools. Obviously, they're a great advantage. Sitting up here with a couple of, Chainalysis and Crystal, some good tools. It doesn't mean that I don't pop into the space, but just to back up what he said, if you're going into court, if you're going into some type of a litigation, being able to reproduce your results with open source, and I'm gonna harp on open source here in a minute, but being able to really reproduce those results with open source, something that you can take into court and don't have to prove what's inside that black box is imperative.
Thanks, and stay there because I have another question for you. Then from your perspective in the private sector, how are criminals adapting their techniques, their strategies, and how investigators and also companies like IVIX are adapting to that?
Yeah, I would say, so we bring in the open source aspect. So really building in OSINT, for investigators that are only focused on chain, you're missing a huge piece of the puzzle. We'll continue to talk about that. But I think, just what Yulia presented, we still see so many exchanges that lack KYC, that lack a robust AML program, that are really cooperative when it comes to, law enforcement requests, what have you. It's no secret who those exchanges are. I know Monica's smiling because she invites me back every year because I'll generally say what needs to be said. And so we know who they are, but the criminals know who they are as well, right? And so they're going to gravitate towards those exchanges. So it's really imperative that we begin to utilize other forms of intelligence to make those leads actionable, which is really pulling in any type of open source if we can. If we can identify the user behind a crypto wallet, which is what we're doing, that's without having to even go to the exchange, that's going to speed up your investigation. Pulling again from Yulia's presentation just a minute ago, 2 minutes and 30 seconds, I think it was, between the laundering and deposit into an exchange. That's not even enough time for most of us to open up our laptop and hit the password, right? And then jump into, a Crystal or a Chainalysis or a TRM or what have you to be able to begin the investigation. So being able to identify that user, if there's enough information out there, and there is tons, we just have to vector every piece of information available in, the clear web and the deep web, including the dark web, but being able to link all of that information together. And that's where we'll talk about AI's role in this in just a minute. I don't want to jump ahead in your question.
Thank you very much. And now I want to switch to Scott. Analytics firms like yours, like Chainalysis, are at the forefront of detecting new criminal typologies every day. We've seen an explosion of new techniques recently, in the last few years. And I think it's also a matter of finding not just the right technique, but also the right place, the right jurisdiction. How do you see that? Do you see like a jurisdictional gap also? And where are criminals going the most in your experience?
Yeah, I think it's really following on from what Daniel said. Yeah, we have new techniques, new typologies. Some of the technical aspects of it can be quite complicated and scary. Obviously, the presentation before us went into that. But what we need to be aware of that is very nuanced, very focused on specific aspects of maybe cyber or cyber-enabled criminality. The biggest threat, the biggest challenge Daniel's already talked about is actually maybe shattering the mystique that this whole crypto industry is hugely complex, hugely complicated. You need to have a degree or a PhD in kind of data science or something like that. That isn't the case. What we're seeing, kind of the largest scale kind of money laundering typologies and investigations, criminals are not stupid, okay? We know that. They will move, they will launder their funds or their proceeds of crime to those jurisdictions, those places around the globe where maybe the response to the cryptocurrency threat in those countries isn't where it needs to be. And what we can do to help kind of shape that and identify those hotspots is take a data-driven approach. Big talk about data. Let's use the data we have to look proactively and identify those hotspots around the world, then come up with a more concise and strategic tactical option to actually deter and detect those threats. How can we then work collectively, public-private partnerships, to kind of iron out or target hard on some of those jurisdictions? So our reports are out there on a monthly or yearly basis. The biggest typology, the biggest threat we're seeing is the funds emanating and flowing into Southeast Asia. We look at the results, or should I say the response to the threat or the mitigating the risks in that part of the world. They don't have the technical understanding. They don't have the regulations put in place, which is why so much funds are deposited into that world, in that part of the world. So when we look at the challenges facing, it's great to have the technical understanding and provide, either us or yourself, a blockchain analytical capability, but that's just one part of the bigger process. What we need to address and to actually target hard in those jurisdictions is we look at a 5-pronged attack. And that comes in some of the capacity building we'll talk about a bit later on. We need to address regulations in that region, in that country. We then need to look at the legislation. We need to look at local policies. Going to what Hugo said, how do you actually seize or recover cryptocurrency assets? Then investigation best practices. Then what is your intelligence collection? If you address all 5 of those parts of the circle, you should be able to have a more kind of meaningful impact. For example, some countries may have really robust regulations put in place, but yet the law enforcement aspect of it don't have the necessary policies or legislation to actually enact the regulations. So we need to work towards a more joined up approach.
Thank you very much. I was maybe to include Daniel in this conversation. So we just heard that there are some hotspots in the world where that are more attractive to criminals to move funds on, also because of the lack of legislation or maybe enforcement gaps. What's your view on that? I know you work for Europol, but still you interact with almost every jurisdiction in your investigations. So what's your take on that? Do you see these jurisdictional loopholes?
Thank you, Fede. It's almost like kicking in an open door. However, I like doing that. I think it's just called the waterbed effect. We observe this in every type of criminal investigation. They will always go to where regulation or oversight is the most lax. So yeah, I'm not surprised that, you know, it's those areas right now. And however, criminals usually are also quite lazy. If something works, I think it was in the previous presentation, they will not deviate from that, which is also what we see quite a lot. You know, stay closer to home. That's where a lot of the chances lie. Cannot go too far into the details, obviously, but yeah, you will always see those kinds of shifts, whether it's shifting to a different jurisdiction or shifting to a different VASP because they're non-compliant. That's nothing new under the sun.
Thank you very much. Now I would like to move to another area which is of great interest, and of course is the natural prosecution of, hopefully, of each and every investigation, which is what do you do with the assets? And this again is coming from personal experience of in the country, of course I also won't name, but I was talking to prosecutors who just conducted an investigation. They seized crypto assets, or they thought they had done. And I was asking, what did you do with the wallet that you seized, with the private keys? And they say, oh, we put it in a safe. And that was seizing cryptocurrency. But of course, I mean, we are much more advanced now. I want to call in Hugo from Asset Reality, who specializes in this kind of what happens to the crypto assets once you find them and you want to seize them. And during every training program that I do with Crystal, I'm often asked, like, okay, now what do we do with the assets, right? So how do we seize them? How do we secure them? Also, another question that I'm often asked is, if I want to run a sting operation, so we know how to do it with fiat, but how do you do with crypto since you can trace the origin of the assets? Or how can I use coins that are not tainted to criminal activity or to the law enforcement itself? So please.
And I'll try and kind of link the two together. And I also, I feel like we've unintentionally as a panel given a kind of a very negative picture, a negative outlook of where we are from a digital asset perspective. So there's a kind of good news story that I'm keen to share. And what we've seen, especially since the start of this year, is generally as a law enforcement community starting to treat scams no longer as a consumer protection issue, but as an all of government approach, requiring involvement not just from law enforcement, but also from regulators, from the intelligence world, from sanctions, and effectively trying to use as many levers at our disposal to try and tackle very, very large, sometimes nation-state funded scam groups. And that shift from a policy perspective, and also, I guess, from an investment perspective that's come out of that, I think is really, really exciting for us, because ultimately it means that for the first time, we're not just dealing with victims on an individual basis. I mean, we've all been there. We've all been on the phone call where someone says, I've just been scammed. I've just liquidated my pension. We're no longer just looking at, certainly my perspective, we don't seem to be looking at these cases as individuals anymore. We're seeing them as very, very large nation state backed organized crime groups, which is what they are. And some of the activity that we've seen in recent weeks reported, for example, the US's forfeiture action against the Princess Group really, really demonstrates that. Part of that shift is being able to go on the offensive, not just by involving lots of different agencies to have a coordinated approach, but actually directly interacting with organized crime groups to be able to understand how they operate at a really, really granular level. So the best way, for example, to take down a darknet marketplace is to interact with it, is to set yourself up as a buyer or as a seller and to understand what happens once I send funds to this place. Where does it go? What do I see from the inside, having set myself up as an account holder? The only way to do that is if you start treating digital assets in the same way that you treat legends for covert operatives. They need to walk and talk in the right kind of way. And we're seeing that shift now. We're seeing that increase in the level of sophistication, not just from the bad actors who are out there trying to spot whether they're interacting with law enforcement, but more importantly from law enforcement who are assigning the right kind of legends to these assets. And the intelligence evidence that you can start gathering intelligence then to try and corroborate corroborate through other means to become evidence, that can become incredibly valuable. And that's why we're starting to see this coordinated action and all of that to effectively be able to generate future kind of seizure opportunities, which brings me on neatly to seizure. For the last 10, 15 years, since 2009 or so, investigations quite rightly has been the focus. Let's try and understand, build out the picture. And I feel like seizure for many has still just been a bit of an afterthought, which has been, how hard can it be, right? We've done the really complicated cross-chain bridges, blah, blah, blah. We found the assets, we found the control. Just get a wallet. Surely it's just as simple as just getting a wallet. And unfortunately, that's still the advice that we see elsewhere. And you starting to understand just what it takes to build a seizure program. It's not just about having a form of custody, a ledger wallet that you can put in the drawer. It's about having the policies, the procedures, the approval structures, the initiators, the prosecutors involved if you need it in that jurisdiction, and understanding just what it takes to be able to safely take custody of an asset as part of a proper law enforcement program, rather than just having, hey, Daniel, here's a ledger wallet, put it in your drawer, we've done the seizure. What if Daniel changes job? Thanks, exactly. What if Daniel changes job, etc. When you eventually need to move it, it just becomes a bit of an organizational nightmare. So it's about trying to deploy these programs. And then once it's safely in custody and it's got the right kind of structures around it, of course, you have other dimensions. I know we've got Tradius later today who are going to be talking about how you try and maximize the return, the value of digital assets, a great partner for us to being able to sell assets. But managing those assets throughout the confiscation and forfeiture lifecycle is something that investigators need to be very closely involved with prosecutors, with the rest of the kind of legal regime that you operate under. Are you able, for example, to take advantage of depreciating or volatile asset legislation that basically says, I've seized this token, in the last 30 days, it has swung 50%. I'm not comfortable holding it as it is. We're going to convert it now to maintain a safe store of value. Does your regime allow you to do that? So I know this isn't specifically a panel around seizure and management, but to almost just stress the point that in the same way that investigations can be very, very tricky, the seizure and management point can as well. And it shouldn't just be an afterthought of just get a wallet, we'll figure it out later.
Yeah, maybe I would like to open the floor to the other panelists about the current framework. Is it sufficient to handle seized assets?
Just a quick thought on that to back up Hugo a little bit. I wouldn't even say it's an afterthought in that sense. And investigators should think about all the procedures and policies around seizing. In fact, at Europol, I talk to my colleagues quite often about this aspect of let's say the cycle of investigations. And our conclusion is basically this is rapidly becoming a specialism of its own.
Yeah.
You cannot expect seasoned investigators that are very good at tracing to just, as let's say their head of team, go over to them and say, now also take all this seizing stuff. Because we've actually, I won't name names, even not during coffee, even not during beers, in social events, I'm sorry. But we've seen, unfortunately, examples of seizures going quite wrong, even in a room full of seasoned veterans of top law enforcement agencies, because seizing is a specialism of its own by now. So I wanted to back you up on that. I feel like the bringer of bad news. That's definitely not what I want to do. I also would like to present solutions. So if you want to talk about that during the social event, come find me and we can talk about that. But if you're thinking about setting up a training program, a policy on cryptocurrency specialists in your organization, also think about seizing, how you're going to embed that, how you're going to make that as robust as possible, given the legal framework that you have in your country.
Yeah, thanks a lot. That's very interesting. And we could have a conference just on seizing the seizure of crypto assets. But talking about...
We do, it's called Seize.
Yeah. Talking about that and the lack of knowledge by law enforcement, now a question for Marian. So I think, as we have seen, standard tools maybe are not sufficient anymore. We see a lot of investigators relying on automated tracing without understanding the fundamental, what's going behind a transaction, and how to properly trace it, how a smart contract works. Now, you're focused on education. It's really commendable. It's really great. How do you see training closing this gap? What do you experience every day during your courses? What kind of new techniques maybe you're teaching to investigators?
Yeah, I think it always has to be a combination of training and tools. And I wouldn't necessarily say that normal tools don't cut it anymore. I really liked Pamela's point about open source. And that's really what can back up your investigations as well, whether you're using proprietary tools or a mix of tools, etc. What we're seeing from more and more law enforcement agencies is we don't necessarily want to have a whole legal proceeding where we need various SMEs to defend these specific models that we're using. If you can take your findings from whatever tool you're using and back it up with the open source, the free tools that are available to anyone, you potentially don't need that expert in court, etc. And I really liked the point of, yeah, it's not all bad news, and the idea about the seizures being good news. We've seen 2 record-breaking seizures recently, and that not only cements the idea that the scale of this problem, how huge it is. I think that has been a challenge with some agencies where it hasn't fully clicked yet. Hopefully, those 2 actions have made people realize how huge this scale of this problem is and how huge crypto is actually. And also that potentially some of those funds can be used to bolster training and education programs as well as buying tools. And I think my point more towards like standard tools aren't enough anymore, automated tracing, etc., is firstly related to the idea of needing to understand the fundamentals of understanding how your tool reached your output, but also that it's more and more becoming about specialized tools for specialized work. So back in the day, Bitcoin transfers were relatively basic. Everything was public key hash addresses. Everything kind of looked the same. Criminals didn't really know obfuscation techniques or that you could even trace it in the way that we do. And so now there's a much more differentiation. And so my kind of message is specialized tools and specialized trainings for the job. So kind of essentially the right tool for the right job. And so do you have an awareness as an agency head, let's say, that your investigators are getting the right tools for the kind of typologies that they're investigating? And do they have the training, adequate training to use those tools? And I really think it's a complement of wider public sector knowledge. So a lot of the training programs that are happening on the public sector side can then be complemented by the private sector stuff, where it's more about those specialized tools and specialized techniques. So that's what we're working towards with raw blockchain data, but then also the specialized proprietary stuff. Pamela also mentioned OSINT. So if you have proprietary OSINT databases, again, you also want to know where that data is coming from. So yeah, whether you're using the attribution, the OSINT, the right tool for the right job, essentially.
Thanks a lot, Marian. Scott?
Yeah, just to reiterate and emphasize there that the last discussion, I think you're right. If I look at Chainalysis as a company over the last 10 years, we've certainly taken that approach where I look at our training where I first started 6 years ago. Yeah, everything was Bitcoin. As a result of that, we've adapted. We've been aware that kind of law enforcement's response, traditionally, it was always sent to the cybercrime specialists. So invariably, their workloads reach capacity. They could no longer actually provide actual value to their own investigations because they were dipping into other investigators. So as a result of that, there was a need for us to change our training to make it more applicable to those relevant subject matter experts, those maybe in the economic crime sphere, maybe those in the wider serious organized crime sphere, because the use of crypto will be different from crime type to crime type. So it's clear to have. So we've gone out, recruited subject matter experts who can then deliver bespoke training depending on the user's requirements. As a result of that, it then lessens the burden on Daniel's team at Europol. You know, that's a great example of the work we've done there at Europol with some of the other teams based within Europol, lessen their workload. And full due respect, okay, Daniel is an expert in kind of cryptocurrency. maybe they might be an expert in, human trafficking, or maybe drug trafficking, or maybe complex money laundering. So it's horses for courses. That's what the approach we've taken.
Thanks a lot, Bob.
Point.
Yes, please go ahead.
Yeah, so I made a note before because we had a great discussion before about kind of pattern recognition on the blockchain and potentially the evolution of not just the linear approach to investigations, but pattern recognition across all blockchains. And I know something that Chainalysis is also deeply interested in. And these kind of typologies that can enable that kind of next-gen level of investigations. We mentioned before as well about scams in Southeast Asia. One of those examples that I wanted to give where it's potentially you don't have any transactions that are actually connected that you could connect visually on a graph, but the patterns that they're using, and I think to Daniel's point before as well, if something works, criminals are also lazy. We can now have those tools that can check for those patterns across the entire blockchain rather than just linearly. And so I love that there's more companies out there and more tools that are doing that.
I think that shifts them from where we used to be as a reactive stance, and now we're into more proactive stance and actually addressing the issues head on before they actually become too large a problem to tackle.
Thank you both. And since we're talking a lot about the education of law enforcement, I'm also thinking about the education of the general public. We're seeing so many people falling for scams. So like recently we've been promoting this service called Scam Alert, where victims can report scams they've fallen for. They can provide data about addresses. They can provide attribution, etc. From Europol's perspective, or law enforcement in general, what do you think do you think this data is useful? So data reported directly by victims into a service like Scam Alert that then can educate the rest of the public about these risks.
So those are actually multiple questions rolled into one. So I will say yes and no. Because yes, it can help prevent others falling victim to a scam. I mean, if they see alerts from others online that, don't invest with platform XYZ because it's obviously a scam, I didn't get my money back. That could definitely be helpful. If you are asking me, is it always helpful in tracing, for example, funds? I've seen a lot of examples where there were some very zealous victims who were just starting to tag everything that they could find that the funds moved to in their eyes, potentially tagging other services along the way. So yeah, you always have to, keep using your brain. Don't trust what you see blindly. Can be an help for law enforcement for sure, but I wouldn't say it's going to fix everything. Coming from Europol, by the way, might be a weird stance. We are in law enforcement, but I believe very heavily in prevention. If we as governments, could, invest a little bit more on preventing those types of crimes, I think it would solve a lot of problems. But that's not my department, unfortunately.
The prevention one's a good discussion. We all talk about prevent, and a lot of work is done in prevent, and we can do a lot of work with that data-driven approach. But I think we still need to talk about actually catching the bad guys as well. And then maybe there's been much too much of an emphasis on the prevent rather than actually getting the bad guys. And it's great that we've now got the ability to amass this huge amount of data. We've now got the technology to actually look at that data programmatically, automatically, with then a view of actually prioritizing the biggest targets, the biggest players across the globe who are actually moving all these illicit funds. But to get to that point, that then goes back into the kind of gist of this panel is the technical challenges. How do we do that? That is where you do need to have a proper technical approach to it, and who has responsibility for that. Is it within Europol? Is it Interpol? Is it a private company who can piece that puzzle together? But yeah, obviously be conscious that prevent is very, very valuable, but let's start getting the bad guys as well. We work with an NGO or kind of civil society organization who did a lot of work in the prevent in the specific crime type. They've gone away from that now into actually going after the bad guys because yeah, you can do prevent all day long, but sometimes you've got to get your hands dirty, kick those doors down and generate the arrests.
Thank you very much. I'm conscious of time, so I will move to the next topic, which is one that nobody talks about. I'm joking. It's AI. Everybody talks about it. But in terms of crypto investigations, we've seen artificial intelligence used now every day in every aspect in the world. I think in terms of investigation, it can accelerate, the analysis, but it also raises some questions in terms of transparency, explainability, courtroom admissibility, of course. Now, this is the question for all of you guys, but please be short. We don't have too much time. Which role do you see AI playing in crypto investigations in the coming months, years?
I'll jump into that first. So I'm going to take everybody back to the kind of the initial crypto investigation into Ross Ulbricht and Silk Road, and think about how long it took for investigators to piece together Dread Pirate Roberts with Frosty, with identifying the source code that was out there and matching that same language, that same code language to how Silk Road was actually built. All that time to do all of that work, that investigative work, to get to the actual identity of Ross himself. That can now be done within minutes, right, with AI. And that's what really, I think, a lot of organizations are working to achieve. So first of all, you have to, again, go back to vectoring, identifying every single piece of information, and then utilizing those algos behind the scenes to create that linkage, right, between the information that's out there and available. I think one of the things that Daniel mentioned about scam victims, and it was something key that you said, which is oftentimes they'll go out and they'll post on a Reddit, or they'll post on some type of a forum, hey, I was scammed by this, I was this, and this. A lot of times they'll leave a crypto address to where they sent those funds, or they'll post a piece of that, or they'll post a hash and saying, hey, can anybody help me with this particular transaction? I have issues with that. Being able to link all of that together and create an overview of these are all these are all victims of the same scam. These are all victims of the same, criminal organization. They're following the same pattern. Being able to do the pattern analysis and create all of this, utilize the data in a really efficient way is something that I don't think we're quite efficient at yet. Right? We're not linking it together. Right now in the United States, if you're scammed, you file a report with IC3 and you never hear anything. And that's just kind of how it goes. I also work with Inca Digital. They're working on behalf of scam victims, going out and putting in TROs to retain those funds at the various exchanges where they are. But it's still very much of a patchwork, right, effort, whether it's, analytics firm, or whether it's law enforcement, or whether it's somebody else in the private sector. And so being able to link all of that together, I think, is essential. And like I said, we leave so much, our digital footprints out there are quite, more than what I think most of us expect. And so, we've been able to go through and find a username who posted a particular crypto address for an airdrop, right, 4 years ago. And we don't typically change, and we do typically tend to link our patterns. We'll link wallets, or we'll link some type of transaction together with something that we did years and years ago, just like Plug Walk Joe, whenever he did that crazy Twitter hack and had like a Bitcoin address, right? And he had previously sent funds to Coinbase, and that's how he was identified like almost immediately, because his hygiene was not the greatest. So being able to link all of that information together is essential, I think, now. And like Marian said, if you're not pulling in open source into your investigation, if you're only on chain, then you're missing a huge piece of the puzzle, and you could actually identify your perpetrator without even sending out a single subpoena, if you're working with the right people.
Thanks a lot. Any other very short take on that?
Very short,
Okay.
I promise. So I think there's a potential for AI to speed up our investigations for sure. But I think one of the most important points, and you already mentioned it, Fede, we should be able to understand what's happening within that algorithm. If we cannot replicate it, and if we cannot untangle that in a transparent manner, there's little point to it, because you don't want to go down that road while you are in the middle of a court case. I think I kept it as brief as possible.
Just fairly familiar. I'll pose a question. AI, it becomes an arms race, doesn't it? It's the criminals use it, law enforcement, the private sector. It's an arms race keeping a pace. At some point in time, will there be a level playing field, and people think, actually, no, let's go back to basics. Let's not engage in anything online, any digital footprint. Let's go back to moving cash in suitcases or bags, handing over into an MS money service bureau. So do we then have to think, oh, we've forgotten how to do that? We have to go back to basics, what we used to do maybe 5, 10 years ago. Could that be the equation where we reach that kind of pinnacle? Everyone's doing the same.
I think we're already seeing that, right? Like, I just talking to some guys from DEA the other day, you know, they used to be able to insert themselves into the laundering chain. They used to be able to they could bid on a contract, they could win the contract, they would be part of the laundering. They can't even bid on a contract anymore because the Chinese launderers are they're doing it for zero. So they can't win a contract, they can't insert themselves, and therefore they cannot obtain those funds that then they can use for other things. And then just look at TD Bank, right? If you guys haven't looked at that case and how they were bringing in duffel bags of cash, right? $1 million at times. If you have not seen the IRS CI presentation on this, I highly encourage you to reach out to some of your contacts and have them show you the behind the scenes photos. But the guy walks in and it's, you know, the guy's the one at the counter depositing cash. It's this lady's account. She's sitting over in the corner. She's obviously the money mule. She's sitting in the corner, doesn't even approach the teller, right? The tellers were paid off. Sometimes with something as simple as like an Amazon gift card. But, you know, they went back to basics. They went back to just cash, just inserting that cash into the financial system. And I think we're definitely seeing that throughout the United States, Canada, Mexico with the Chinese money launderer kind of network. Yeah.
Touch crypto for exactly.
Yeah, I wouldn't use crypto if I was laundering money. Yeah.
Thank you very much. I mean, time is never enough. We'd like to keep on discussing with you guys. But so thank you very much. Thank you, everyone. I would say the few key takeaways of this conversation is what we need is innovation, of course. We need capacity building, collaboration, and also an holistic view, which is what we've seen from prevention to awareness, seizure, regulation, and so on. I think we act better if we act together, so private sector, public sector, which I think has been the main message of this conference since the first edition. So I want to thank you all very much. And
we take this the first question very quickly.
Oh,
please.
I know Daniel's not allowed to have favorites, but I am. Belgium has a truly world-class investigation seizure management program, and we're very lucky to have them in the room. I know we've got Bram and Peter. Sorry to call you out, but go speak to them if you want to hear about a truly world-class seizure program.